Hey guys, Savage Joy here with Real Progressives. Tonight we're going to be switching it up a little. I typically have candidates pretty much anywhere from 3 to 8 times a week, but tomorrow we have 5 primaries, so I wanted to kind of do something different tonight. As a lot of you guys know, I went to DC to the Poor People's Campaign on Saturday, and these two gentlemen were there as well. Jamie Longazel, I actually met on the bus trip to DC. So that was pretty amazing. And then Joe, Tremor Traina, you guys may remember, he's come on my show before. Bag of dicks. He's the gentleman that was sent a gummy bag of dicks from their Democratic Party. So yeah, all that fun stuff. And so I've had him and Trent on a number of times. But anyway, I digress. So I hit these fellas up because I wanted them to come on so we could discuss, from 3 different perspectives, what it was like for us on Saturday. So for me, it kind of hit me right when I got off the bus and we started walking up and I heard that music. It just kind of I just got chills, even though it was like 1,000,000 degrees out. I got chills, like all these powerful voices and so much love. Jamie, what was it like when you started walking up and you came to that field of thousands of people?
Yeah, the first thing that caught me actually before I took in the field, I noticed the tent. So as you walk up to the field, they had a little tent up where they had signs and things like that. And somebody hopped out and said, free signs. And, you walked into there and it just, you felt the history because so many of the signs were bringing back the 1968 campaign. So much of the symbolism and they had a little listening tent there with some music playing and some old speeches playing, I heard at one point. So the tent is what got me and kind of it gave it that historical feel and made it really, made the connection to 1968 feel real. So that was my initial shock before we even got to the crowd.
Absolutely. That was amazing. I should also say that Jamie's in New York. Joe is in Georgia. What was your feeling when you first got to the march, Joe?
Well, I got there right as Mark Thompson was beginning to, read the welcome in, and I think Mark Thompson, of course, is someone who is a member. He's a member of indigenous tribes here. He's a Native American leader, and he actually played a big role in curating a lot of the different pieces of art and I guess not art, but culture in the Native American Museum there in Washington, D.C. But he's a staple for progressive politics, especially as it relates to dealing with the injustices that our country still just targets at the Native American community, and the Native American community is just asking to exist, and we're seeing sort of the same. I guess what hit me was how thick and present this event was because of everything else that's going on in the country right now. Folks are not able to exist, whether it's Antoine Monroe out there in Pennsylvania, or whether it's the young folks that are the children that are in these cages still separated from their families. We are at a crisis in this country of decency and of basic human rights in this country, and we are the vanguard. It was obvious to me that morning, that assembly of folks, it was hard. I think it was hard to put into words. I think some of the speakers did a really great job, but I think all in all, there's a lot left unsaid because it's just so hard to put into words what's happening right now in this moment and what it is each of us is supposed to be doing exactly, when we leave and come back. But that was the message that I I took from it, and then I'm trying to share with the folks, back home is, now we've got to pick this up. We were there, we came together, we felt the energy, we derived, information and motivation from folks, from unions and faith leaders. Now we hit home, and it's time to organize. Time to really combat this systemic, institutional, electoral, and just endemic corruption.
Right on. And speaking of faith and what have you, that was something that I'm a total heathen, so I don't typically surround myself with church music and stuff like that. But the way the energy was and the way that everything fit together, it was so beautiful. And I was just like, this, even as a heathen, in no way does this offend me whatsoever. Pretty much the majority of people on stage throughout the day were, pastors and what have you, but it didn't bother me. It was so beautiful and it was so amazing. And, it felt like things used to be, honestly, because you could go up to people. I was hugging people I've never met in my life. I miss those times. I miss that. I miss when, I was campaigning for Bernie. That's how things were. So there was a lot of hope there. And we haven't really seen that hope in quite some time. Jamie, what was your thoughts on that? Did you have the same experience?
Yeah. I'm thinking about, as you're talking, what you're tapping into, and I think one of the terms they use a lot is truth, and I think that what we're seeing in a campaign like this, where you're bringing so many different groups together around so many different issues, and yet it manages to work and it manages to inspire all sorts of folks, and all sorts of folks are being inspired by the folks that they're not normally inspired by, or connecting from, or listening to folks that they're not. And I think a lot of it comes down to just, the leaders of this movement speaking truth, and if it's religion that's the source of their truth, or if it's their own experience with poverty and systemic racism and war and ecological devastation, then we can hear that truth. And yeah, there was kind of the essence, I think, of all of the speakers and of the whole rally was just this truth, and there were thousands of us there connected around this feeling that something is not right, that something is wrong in our society, that there's this lack of morality, and again, regardless of how you define it or how you approach it, that's what I think we managed to come together around. And that's one of the things that I think, gives me a lot of hope for this movement going forward too, is we're just going to speak truth, and there's not a lot of adjustments or strategizing you need to do when truth is what you're speaking. You just keep on speaking it, and you keep on speaking it to more and more people, and people are going to come on board in whatever way makes most sense to them.
Absolutely. What's that, Joe?
Well, I've got to slice that. Even my own sort of positive take with sort of some observations that I took of, maybe it's because we're in the middle of, primary. That's probably what it is. But I went all the way to the back and I looked from the far tent and I realized, and it might have been that maybe people showed up later, because it felt like there were many more of us walking in the march than there were at the actual stage. But I had to, I couldn't help thinking this is the 50th anniversary, and we've all grown up seeing the images and the video of Martin Luther King Jr. Speaking, and the crowds that formed for the Poor People's March and the Million Man March and things of that nature. So it got me thinking. I don't know. I guess there was a bittersweet. I knew we were there for a good reason. I knew that we were coming together to highlight these issues and recommit to the work that we need to do, at home and around the country. But there was also this feeling of like, wow, so this is what we can pull together, right? This is who could show up on this Saturday, in this season and this year. You know, I'm sure we were dropping the buckets like the Women's March or the Science March or things of that nature. But I hope that maybe what we can do is you know, make sure that we don't, you know, make sure that we tell this story everywhere, so that, you know, more folks show up next year and we keep it going. So the 100th year, you know, is, you know, something that'll be far off in the future, but so that also we can count victories, because that was the other sort of bittersweet realization is, you know, we're 50 years out and we're still very much, you know, on the ropes with these issues of wage stagnation, of classism, racism, sexism, and just to your sort of your point earlier about the religious aspect. I'm Unitarian. There were a lot of Unitarians there, I noticed. And I was like, okay, cool, great. There's lots of us here from all over. But the Unitarian faith is super white. It's like upper middle class, you know, sort of the median there. And so we've got to be honest too. I think, you know, those of us who could show up in DC and had the motivation to, maybe we should also recommit to being able to make it more possible for, you know, dozens of us to show up from our respective areas. I got to say, like, I don't know where Georgia was, and I felt really bad about that, because like I was there and my mom was there and some of our folks in Augusta, but I couldn't see Atlanta. I was just really curious, because like, what's happening here? Where's our organization going? Especially in the South. But it's probably another conversation you know we can get into about, you know, just organizing the South and what the problems are there. But with the heathen thing, like, I think we can do a little better at having non-theist language, you know, making sure that folks, because there is this huge demographic now of folks that just don't go to church or don't identify with a church home or, you know, maybe a religious bent. And I was just this last week trying to defend folks on the left who were getting, you know, kind of like, I don't know, the right does it to us when they say we're being insensitive about their religious rights or, you know, right to express or whatever. And I noticed, like, even some centrist, moderate folks in the left were doing the same thing to folks who are, you know, just open about being non-theist and, you know, not being like, religion is stupid, don't do it ever, but just, you know, being proud to not being open about, you know, being, you know, a non-theist or atheist or agnostic, what have you. Gotta have room for everybody, right? I mean, I just feel like we can do better on that. Yeah.
Right on. And you know, something that was so interesting is, you know, Martin Luther King Jr. did start this. It was the 50th anniversary, so, you know, you were reminded of him. People were saying quotes of him, of course, and everything surrounding this culminated because of this man and the way he inspired people. And at one point, I really had to stop myself from, I was like straight up about to ugly cry, like hardcore, because I was thinking, you know, what would this man be thinking if he were alive right now? I cannot even fathom. That thought breaks my heart. Like, I mean, what do you guys think? Like, have you guys ever thought of that? What's your take on how you think you would feel right now? Jamie, your wheels turning.
Yeah. You know, I don't know. My wheels are turning because I think, you know, I try to resist the urge to think of like one king, you know, like, I mean, really with any historical figure, like folks progress, you know, and change with the context and change as they grow and change as they learn and so on. And so yeah, the question got my wheels turning because there's a lot of layers to it, and my brain keeps wanting to come back to where he was at the end of his life, which is doing this work, right? Which is fighting against what he called the evil triplets, fighting against you know, militarism and racism and materialism and gosh, I mean, that stuff, you know, to think of where that stuff has gone since then. I mean, militarism especially, really. I mean, the amount of you know, the amount of war, like just how expansive it is, at the moment and over the past few decades, we don't even know what country we're at war with at this point. There's just bombs everywhere, it seems, and inordinate amounts of money spent on it. The sort of the forms of racism that exist now, that look just like the ones that did then, but are popping back up in other ways, and mass incarceration and police brutality. And then all of this poverty. I mean, there's more. Like the report that This Poor People's Campaign released, called "The Souls of Poor Folk." Their findings are just heartbreaking. I mean, there's more poverty now than there was in '68 when they were doing this work. And so, yeah, I mean.
Do you remember the number on it? 140 million people are at or below the poverty line in this country. And if anybody knows the total number, that means almost half the country is at or below the poverty line. I think, and you can take it back over, Jamie, if I'm cutting you off or anything. But I grew up on King. My mom was a huge. She exposed me to that very early. I remember children's books about King, and I remember like young adult books. I remember reading all the speeches and then watching all the movies. And I think the best one was probably done recently on HBO. Probably dove as deep as any into the man and into the conflicts, the personal conflicts. I think we also know, and we can be honest at this point, that King was not a partisan. If anything, he was an ideologue that led with love and compassion, and was not afraid to say, "Look, these are socialist tenets, right? These are about putting society before profit, before materialism, before capitalism." And I think that's sort of another proof positive, right? Is like this is failed. This is a failed system, right? This is a system where we police the world, we militarize the world, we destabilize the world in order to build our own, in order to get a greater return on our bonds, essentially, and profitability. This that's neoliberalism, right? People need to understand when they always question what is neoliberal, what's liberalism. Like that's it. You're complicit to that, and that is what King was fighting against, just as much as the KKK and Boss Hogg, whatever small town racist sheriff's department. That was just the local manifestation of a bigger system that we have continued to perpetuate across the country, which is now bringing refugees to our southern border. Like we got to own this, and that's what was so. That's what was. I'm from Paraguay. My native or my indigenous background is Guarani. And in Paraguay, that's sort of my Wakanda, I guess. But we've got indigenous folks there still that are now having to fight against the political pressures of neoliberal Latin American leadership. That's essentially sponsored by the U.S. government, and their militaries, which are essentially stockpiles of weaponry that's exported from us. We don't own that. We don't look at that. We don't see that. We don't put the connections, the cause and effect. But that's why we've got families at the southern border looking for a better opportunity. And it's not even just a better opportunity, right? It's not just that they want the American dream, right? We all want the American dream. These people literally are afraid of whether they'll make it tomorrow. You know what I mean? That's a reality that we don't. Our American privilege, our Western privilege, we don't have to fathom on a daily basis. And we're missing that in the headlines. We're missing that in the 24-hour media. Our own democratic leadership is missing that, I think, too, in a lot of the message that we're putting out, or that we're not even that we're defensive on, or we're slow to punch out. I think one of the best speakers was actually the high schooler, a young high schooler. I wish I could remember his name or where he was from exactly, but he had just mentioned about how he 4 weeks ago graduated from high school, and I felt like his words cut we were talking about truth. I felt like they cut exceptionally well. And one of the things I'll never forget is him saying essentially look, if the Democrats won't do it, we will. You know, if Republicans won't do it, we will. If local governments won't do it, we will. And that's an ownership of here's what's coming that I would hope that I would believe in my heart of hearts. Martin Luther King Jr. would appreciate. Of course, the huge tenet to his philosophy is nonviolence, right? As nonviolent demonstration. And I think these young people, these young folks, and I guess we're inclusive, right? We're maybe on the upper echelon of that age frame. I think if we can be deliberate and train and get ahead of how exactly we're going to organize our numbers in demonstration and at the ballot, then I think we're doing the memory proud. Otherwise, I would just hope that we can get off this the hamster wheel. It seems like that it keeps coming out of the state house leadership or the federal Pelosi or Schumer. It just seems like rote, expected, sort of automation, and we got to do better, or this blue wave, right, is going to be a trickle.
Yeah, I mean, fuck the blue wave. We need a progressive wave. Like, seriously, like, just, but, on that note,
no, I'm good, guys. I'm going to go now.
What's that?
No, I think I vomited everything that was on my mind right then.
Hey, I'm known for my rants, so it's all good. But yeah, one thing that absolutely just shocked me yesterday in a really, really, really good way was that certain speakers were actually holding Democrats accountable as well.
Right.
I was so excited because it seems like so many events I go to or even organize myself, it is Trump, 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 Trump. And it's like, wait a second. The Dems are so focused on talking shit about Trump that they are literally doing nothing for any of us. So the fact that people were actually calling that out was so surprising to me, but so welcomed and so awesome. Jamie, we talked a little bit about that at the train station. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this isn't the exact example, but one of my favorite moments that I got kind of a chuckle out of, but also was pretty meaningful was when they had organized labor come up, they Reverend Barber said, we're going to flip it. Instead of having one of the workers introduce the union presidents, we're going to have the union presidents introduce the workers, and it's the workers who are going to give the speech. And I forget which union it was, but one of the presidents was going on a little bit too long and essentially making a speech in his introduction. And Reverend Barber cut him off and said, you're done. We're here. We want to hear the workers speak. This is not your floor. And so just kind of flipping that, that power around. I mean, even amongst progressive folks, like it's the essence of this movement, and from when they've been planning it and going back to in the tradition of King and others, the essence of this is it must be led by the poor. It must be led by poor and working class folks. And that's who we're given the microphone to. And if others who have power, who have more privilege than these folks, what have you, they want to come along, fine, that's good. Come along, everybody's allowed in. But they're not leading the way, we're not having people speak for people, we're having the people speak, is how they were putting it yesterday. And so I think that applies to the Democratic Party too. It's like, if we're going to have a conversation about needs, if we're going to have a conversation about inequality, we don't want to hear somebody who's, at the top of the power structure tell us what we ought to do about inequality. We want to hear from people who experience inequality, who are experiencing poverty, and what they need and what kind of policies work for them. It's so key. And I think that gets to the heart of the problem. Like on one side you have, hatred and nationalism and whatever else going on. And on the other side you have just, kind of this quest for power that's empty and not hitting people. It doesn't hit people. It doesn't stick with people because it's not the people's voices. It's someone speaking for the people instead of letting them speak for themselves. So yeah, that's one of the things I've really been drawn to about this campaign is the real focus on the bottom up. You know, people throw the word grassroots around, I think, a little bit too merrily sometimes, but this is real. This is led by and for the poor. You know, and that's key.
Well, yeah. I've got a mechanics are really important to me, being someone that does a lot of professional campaigns. I think what we have here is an opportunity with the Poor People's Campaign is an opportunity for us. This is very different from like a candidate or a ballot initiative. We have problems that folks are facing on a daily basis for which the solutions will not come with an election or with one particular sort of action item. But I think a huge blind spot that we probably have had for the last few years is building the relationships between folks that are middle class, upper class, and the poor. I live in a low income neighborhood. I always have. I had opportunities to move and leave and live other places, but I moved back because I felt like the work that I was doing in other places that were maybe more metropolitan had more opportunities, like Seattle and Boston. In the sort of the upper side, you know what I mean? Not the not where the work was really needed to be done. I felt like I was missing on delivery and on relationships that I needed to build, in my own neighborhood. So I hope that, and I'm, I've signed up for the emails and the texts and the, all the rest from the Poor People's Campaign. But I also know that sometimes in campaigns they don't know what to ask for, or asking for what they really need is sometimes the hardest thing to do, or the words aren't, put together well. And so I would hope that, and this is sort of my pledge to you, Joy, and Jamie, and just others in the movement, the commitment here to really try and take action, where I am, because that's what grassroots is. It's the grass in front of you and on either side of you first, and sort of report back and feed that up, because some of this, if the Poor People's Campaign is hiring, great, but if not, the work needs to get done either way, and we can start building relationships that then can give the Poor People's Campaign a reason to look in our own neighborhoods. So, I would love to hear what's going on in New York and what's working there, and be able to report back, from what's working in a community, down south or all over. But mechanics are super important to me, and I know a rally isn't, always the best place to talk about boring, activities, but that's also where some of the greatest inspiration is. If you go into a neighborhood and make relationships with families and kids and teachers and faith leaders, that they're there every Sunday, they're there Monday through Friday, and if you really care, like, they're the ones that you'll prove it to first, before we end up, I think with any monumental victories or what have you. But so I'm looking forward to what's next. I'm looking forward to directives, but also self-directed stuff from here.
Right on. And you brought up the Women's March prior.
Yeah.
And I think we may not have had those numbers on Saturday. However, there's something we had that they don't. And that is, we had real activists. A lot of the women's campaign, the women's marches rather, a lot of them have people who are, one day a year, they come out and they put on their pink pussy hats, and they're activists. They're being mildly inconvenienced for a few hours on one day a year, and that's the extent of their activism. People on Saturday were so hardcore. I mean, these people had like so much energy and so many stories to tell, and the amount of like people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and the amount of disabled people and everything, it was so beautiful, and it was so it was such an eclectic crowd, and just so many different states people were representing as well. Jamie, what was that kind of your take as well?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like you sort of automatically compare it to other rallies in DC within the last year, right? Because that's what it felt like. Um, but I think it's a little different here because you have first of all these 40 days of civil disobedience leading up to this, and so in that regard, I mean, maybe not the number of people involved doesn't match women's marches and that sort of thing, but just that level of commitment too, right? Like you're talking about. I mean, I was involved in the campaign in Pennsylvania, and the routine there was to meet up with folks the night before, and there was prep, and there was discussion, and there was love and food and all of that kind of stuff. That real sort of connecting that organizing is about, right? Not just the sort of one shot symbolic act. And so, that was happening, and then people are doing civil disobedience, and it's not just like, look at me, I got arrested. It's talk about it as a moral witness, right? Like you're experiencing something deep and profound and confronting that injustice in a really, really powerful and meaningful way. And so, there are folks in 40 states doing that. I think the number is like between 2,500 and 3,000 exercise civil disobedience over the 40 days, and at most of the rallies, you're talking a small percentage of people are doing civil disobedience. So the rallies are more well attended than that in all of these states, over 6 weeks, plus this, and the work that was leading up to it, the work that's coming after it. I mean, it feels much more like a movement than an event. I mean, it was an event in a movement, and it was a good chance to kind of celebrate and sing together and hear some music and speeches. But I think, I don't even know if we know the numbers of how many people were there, and you get the sense that folks don't really care, because it was a party. It was an event within the movement, right? Like it was a chance to come together and proclaim what we're proclaiming, and on we go the next day too, just like we did the day before, So yeah, that was my sense. I think it's easy to compare, and it's worth comparing, but I think the point of comparison should be the sort of level of commitment and this notion of being a movement rather than just a quick statement.
Yeah, absolutely. One of our teammates, Mark, is asking, being a part of the crowd, where we're most focusing their anger. To me, it seemed like, I mean, granted, these were the signs that they were handing out, but a lot of, the signs were focused on children. It's violence to starve children. It's violence to not give them education. It's violence to not have free and fair elections. These things are violence. And a lot of it was, kid oriented as well. I think, to me, I saw a lot of it geared towards that. Joe, what was your take?
I think the echoes were around poverty, and of course it was always good to, it's always good to get reinvigorated by partners, in labor and in the environment, LGBT. Of course, it was Pride weekend in a lot of places across the country. It's of course Pride Month. I know in my hometown, I was missing our big event, but I think the rainbow was there, so to speak, of progressive identities. But I saw a lot of anti-war, of course. But I think the one thing I just kept seeing everywhere was, fight poverty, not the poor, right? Fight against the violence of a system that creates poverty, that makes it possible, and leaves so many people behind. Fight against that, and not poor people, right? Let's end the victimization of folks without, because that's what we're saying. We're saying, in a system that's dependent on the haves and have-nots, let's be honest about who's hurting and why, and what it is we can do to change wherever we are in the movement.
Absolutely. Yes, Don. I totally agree. A viewer states that the poverty is systemic. There's not just one cause. Totally true. This is by design. And Jamie, I correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you have done some research in a for-profit prison as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I mean, that all kind of seems to tie in as well.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes this campaign. I think it feels it could feel to some like it's unfocused because it's talking about so many issues, but it's also doing that because it's drawing attention to the interconnectedness of the issues. So I mean, yeah, walking around like Joe was saying, like you can see people had signs for the campaign and they had signs for their issues and their organizations that they were fighting, but I think throughout there was an acknowledgement that these are systemic problems, that these are institutional problems, that they're rooted in capitalism, that there's overlap, that kind of thing. And I think that's a really key discussion that we're not seeing enough of, where the criticism is of one party and we need to replace them with the other, or something like that, or of bad apples in police forces, or this sort of individualized explanation for things. And so, yeah, I mean, I think we can say that, to go back to the prison example, like we can say that about what's going on at the border, right? Like it's about systemic racism, in that you have the dehumanization, this dehumanizing rhetoric that makes this kind of stuff possible in the first place. Plus, you have the capitalist need for inexpensive labor. Plus, you have the imperialism that's driving folks out of their home in the first place. Plus, you have the profiteers who are licking their chops about this idea of locking up more and more people regardless of who they are, right? So this whole interconnectedness of all of these problems is part of that, right? And I think that's been my sense in being around the campaign, is that there's a real acknowledgement that this is systemic, that this is not just a fluke, not something we could fix that easily.
Yeah, absolutely. Joe, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think again, just I always go back to mechanics, and I think what's been when people ask, so what's the point? Why do you go march? Why do you why do you get together? If there are these different directions, why not focus on one? Or how can you expect success without using the Democratic Party or using some sort of electoral mechanism? I think that's losing sight of why this is important the way it is, because we're talking about the Moral Monday movements. We're talking about demonstrations that are expected, that create a shorthand for progressives to come in from where they are and build together. And that's really important. We have to be intentional about creating more of those spaces and in more places. So, I'm glad to hear that more states are getting on board with this. More leaders are on the ground, seem to be organizing these demonstrations at state houses, because putting that in front of elected leadership, putting that in front of cameras that may get press online or in the papers and what have you. It's funny you mentioned the folks getting arrested. I think everybody I knew there that I ran into, maybe for the first time I was meeting them, or I was running into them again. We've all been arrested for something at some point now. It's like, it's not even controversial anymore. But it's the squeaky wheel, right? It's creating the squeaky wheel that gets the oil when it's time to count a victory for either side, either party, either political apparatus. And it also helps encourage folks who end up running for office to pressure folks. You mentioned before, Joy, we've got quite a few primaries happening tomorrow. I think New York's up, and it's is that right, Jamie? I mean, you could tell me about. We've got a couple of I think the 19th is the congressional 19th is a big one I'm hearing about, and so it's without candidates applying pressure in ballots, whether they're independents or Democrats or just progressives under another banner, it's hard to get a barometer. Prime example, right? So, we just ran a race here in Georgia 12, and if we hadn't, we wouldn't know what the limits are for these more establishment voices. Now we do, and that puts us, I think, at an advantage, even if it means, this time around we don't get the outcome we want. We're getting many more lessons than we would get if we didn't organize and if we didn't, build these teams, and if we didn't do things, like marches and like rallies, and to test our capacity and keep building.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think a key is to keep people activated. The second we stop, we become complacent, even if it's unconsciously so. We have to keep fighting. And, it sounds so trite, but Saturday, those were fighters. Like the one woman, I was so just madly in love with the march, because even though I was carrying 30 pounds of equipment and I wanted to cry because walking miles in the heat while carrying that is not ideal, but there was a woman in front of me on crutches with one leg. She was in front of me the entire time and just kept going. I mean, she was chanting, and I was just like, damn, like, these people are straight up warriors. Like, these people are so passionate about these things, whether it's them going through it or someone they know, or even if they're just an empath, they are that passionate that they're saying, you know what, regardless, I'm going to do this. And it was just so amazing. And then, seeing, there were more people than we could see. Like, it felt like it went on for miles. You look ahead, you couldn't see everyone. It was impossible. So we're marching and you see all these Capitol buildings and the Washington Monument and stuff, and you just see thousands of signs and people, cheering and stuff. It was so phenomenal. It seemed like the ideal place for it. It felt good to get some of that rage out and to basically, say, we're still here. Like, fuck you. We are not quitting. We're here. We see you. We're taking you on. How did you guys feel when we were walking around all those monuments and just kind of, hearing the drums and the people, chanting and everything? What was going through your head?
Go ahead, Joe.
You want to take it?
For me personally, the last time I had been a part of anything as large or organized, with the chanting and the signs, was anti-war activity back in, I want to say, it must have been 2006 or 7. The anger and the frustration ended up bringing out, so many folks from different backgrounds and places all across the country. And I think I remembered that time because not only did we bring a really large local group, but we also left with a lot of great contacts and relationships built. So that's another big component about this is, I met a guy from Buffalo, New York, standing behind me. I said, hey, man, you want to start a chant with me real quick? And he's like, sure, let's do it. But now there's a contact, right? I ran into like my boss, one of my old bosses I used to work with on an issue campaign. He lives in Minnesota now. Didn't even know I was going to run into him. Ran into him there. But we're connecting and talking about what is it we can do now with the networks that exist, that didn't maybe 4, 5, 6 years ago. So I was thinking about, this is where we are. I was definitely, kind of like I mentioned before, appreciating the moment that we're in and the significance of, the Washington Monument behind us and the Congress in front of us and, the asshole in chief, over, the ways going up and down Independence Avenue and then walking by all these office buildings that we see, right, or we hear about in the media, right? We're walking by FEMA, we're walking by Department of Agriculture, we're walking by, so these people in these buildings that are doing this work, they need to have heard our rumblings, right? They need to have seen us and known that we were there, and hear about that. And we need to own that we came and we sent a message, and we're not done, right? It's very much, as Jamie mentioned, a transition, just to another step along the way to mark where we are, where we're going, and recommit. I was thinking about, the next 50 years, right? So what are the victories that we're going to hold on to from here?
Yeah, somebody asked in the comment section, how do we keep this going? And the interesting thing is that one of the speakers was saying that it took 3 years to plan Saturday, and it took over 3,000 volunteers. So with that being said, I'm like, I don't see how it's feasible, at all. It would happen again next year. So is it not our responsibility to just organize similar things on a smaller scale?
I think it goes back to the what I was saying before about it being an event within a movement. So to your last question about the feeling going around as we marched. For me, it was really special because, I've been involved with the folks at a group I work with in Pennsylvania called Put People First, mm-hmm. and as well as some folks from the Cairo campaign. So there was something about, there's DC is what it is, but DC also has this aura to it when you think about the imagery of the the famous protests and marches and so on. And so for me, like seeing those folks there with the Capitol as the backdrop and with the Washington Monument as the backdrop, and seeing folks that I've been spending a few weekends of a year organizing in church basements and sitting on conference calls on the phone. Like we've been doing that work for quite a while, and the same can be said for all of the folks who are doing this kind of work and who have done this kind of work leading up to the campaign. And so yeah, I would caution, like I wouldn't phrase the question as how do we keep going? How do we keep that event, like what happened on Saturday, going? It's been going and is still going. It's just a matter of it growing, right? So like. Just the thought of that many people being involved in this campaign that looked small, relatively small a few years ago, and watching it grow and continuing to do this work. So yeah, like if we get to DC again, if we get cameras on us again, good, and that's important. But I think this work is still happening, behind the scenes. It's happening now as we're having a conversation about this stuff, right? This is part of the work.
Yeah, I think it's just to echo and support, what Jamie's saying there. If you're asking, how to help or how to grow, then hopefully you've got some time or you've got some capital that you can, help us with, because that's really what it takes. That's really what we need is more people, and really honest. I would say people is probably more important than money. If you have time to give, then there's work that actually gets done. Unfortunately, I think we know this because of our own political system. Just because it has more money in it doesn't mean we get better, doesn't mean we get better outcomes for ourselves, right? We got, we outspent Trump and we lost, and we lost on a technicality. But it's also happening, in these congressional races across the country, and it's because I think sometimes people with means maybe think that that's the best way that they can contribute, when really, it doesn't take a whole lot of physical dedication to pick up a phone, to be willing to take calls for an organization, to be willing to, show up, once a month, twice a month, to help get the word out about events that are organizing the community. And that's really what's at stake here is when we go to DC and we come together, that's the moment to recommit. That's the moment to realize, okay, it's not just me. I'm not alone, here in my corner of things where it can be frustrating, where we can, you can go weeks without, positive or a lead on something. or you've got elected officials that are, seemingly shutting the door. And so that's part of the critical mass, right? That's what you create. If you're asking, how do I help? How do I grow? How do I help this grow? If you have someone that's leading things, help them. Don't have someone that's leading things locally, figure out how it is you can help lead, or you can identify leaders in your community, because there are young folks that need the training, and there are folks that have been doing this that can own some of this, and if they're not in a position to actually lead it themselves, then we got to be creating a lane for folks that can get out and have the petition signed, that can get out and get the voters registered, that can get out and take the surveys for folks to figure out what are the patterns here. Is it that we have poor transit in these communities? Is it that wages have stagnated? Is it that the types of jobs that we're providing in certain communities are not compensating enough for the communities to thrive? Is the housing isn't such a terrible frame that folks can't afford to live in certain communities, or we have such a turnover of the renter sort of demographic that no one can own anything, that no one can create generational wealth. Like we'll find these problems and we'll fix them, but only if we have people willing to commit, and that means time, that means energy, that means helping, that means critical mass, because otherwise we don't create the squeaky wheel that that puts enough pressure on the city alderman or the city commissioner or the district chair or whoever to actually deliver. Because otherwise, these people just sit around and do nothing, right? Pat themselves on the back and and hold on to those seats. But yeah.
Right on. What as far as really the entirety of Saturday, what was the most impactful moment to you? I know I showed Jamie a photo that I think it's the most beautiful photograph I've ever taken in my entire life. There was this little girl, maybe 5, and she had a headscarf on with lace, and a little boy who maybe was 6 or 7, and they were each holding up signs about poverty, and they walked with their arms around each other for like a while. It wasn't just for a photo. Like, they walked arm in arm, and I'm tearing up just thinking about it. It was so amazing. It was just so pure and so full of hope, and it was just incredible. So that to me was like, that was so epic. I couldn't top that. Earlier I was kind of fangirling because I was in the press box, and I saw so I was, Reverend Barber was there, Jesse Jackson was there, and one of my activist heroes, Danny Glover, was there, like all within like a foot of me. So I was kind of fangirling. But then when I saw those 2 kids and I saw them from behind and just watched them, and I just thought, oh my God, do they have any idea how powerful they are right now? Like, do they understand how much hope they're giving people just by being kind to each other? And it just, I don't know, it was just one of the most amazing moments ever. Jamie, what was a moment that really stuck out to you?
Yeah, I think for me, I had a lot. I think one that's coming to mind is when we, during the march, when the march started, it was really special, but during the march, when we finally got to the Capitol and you kind of made that turn to go around, and as soon as we got there, there was kind of a swarm of media, and I watched the Democracy Now! Coverage and have since learned what was going on there. I couldn't peek my head over to figure it out, but I guess the campaign leaders were asking to go in and deliver their list of demands. I guess they had a box or a few boxes, and they were told that they couldn't. They can go in as individuals, but not as a group. And then some controversy ensued. But they kind of, as that happened, they just kept the march in general walking. And so we marched in front of the Capitol, and they had all of the metal posts, sort of fences up, and a police officer, or a Capitol police officer, like every 3 feet, it felt like. And so like that scene sort of, looked a lot like what we're experiencing now. I mean, like, there's Congress, and we're locked out of it, and it's protected by these, armed guards, and there's fences, and we just don't have access to our legislature. And so there was that scene, but then there we were marching and singing and holding up these signs. And I just, you just kind of felt this urge to, like, show the officers the sign, show the Capitol the sign. Like, it felt for a minute that we had power, that we were able to, that we didn't get in, that we're not in yet, right? Like, there's still that symbolism of being locked out that sucks. But there was also this feeling of like, but we have power, but we still have our dignity, right? We're singing all of these songs about, going back to the rich man's house and taking back what he stole from me, right? Like, we're maintaining our dignity as we march, and we're singing, and we're expressing pride, and we couldn't get in, but we were showing that we're still together, that we still matter, that we still have our dignity, and damn it, we're going to get in there soon enough, So that was a special moment for me. It just sort of captured, June 2018 in a really meaningful way.
Just before we continue, there's a viewer named Dawn in the comments, and she's stating that there's nothing political about the Poor People's Campaign, and I definitely have to disagree with that. I'm not saying it's about a certain candidate or a certain party. However, how do we change things unless we get people who are the 99% in office who actually give a fuck about people who are poor and will implement things like Medicare for all, federal job guarantee, fight for 15 at the absolute minimum. So yes, it is political. Maybe not outright. Maybe they don't say this is a political event, but it is completely relative. And politics were spoken about nonstop. There's a direct correlation. So I'm not quite sure why the hastiness. It's not really making sense to me. But anyway, I just wanted to kind of get that in there because there's been a number of those comments. So anyway, Joe, what was your moment?
Well, I really couldn't add, to you guys' moments. I think it was more, I was just kind of processing, the whole thing as an experience. But that comment about it's not political is really interesting. So I kind of want to say, I guess the generic definition of politics is, acquisition and what a party, not a political party, what people have to do, what governments have to do, what societies have to do to organize, resources and outcomes. So, this is very much a movement in that sense. It may not have an obvious partisan, literal relationship because parties are organized in very specific ways. But it's if it's not a political movement, I would be curious as to kind of what it is, how it is to function, and then also the form of it. What is this in the form if not a political movement where people who are adamant about representing their communities in Washington D.C., in the nation's capital, for better outcomes for our communities. But yeah, no, I couldn't add anything other than to say I did go to the Native American Museum after after that, and it was I was floored by how well curated it was, especially the segments on really kind of going into every treaty that the U.S. government has ever presented as an olive branch to these Native American nations and or indigenous people, and completely gone back on, right? So and all the way up to Standing Rock, right? So we're very much living in a historical moment where the things that we do, the ways that we organize, and the mechanics that we bring, and the way we build and train each other on how best to get these political outcomes, these positive outcomes for our communities, is going to make the difference for the next 50 years, 30 years, for the next generation. So I'm eager to keep it going, keep in touch with the audience, and keep in because we're very much my going was also sort of a test of, okay, here's the pulse is, here's what the beat is, here's what we're chanting for, and why we're getting together here at the national level. How can I bring this home? How can I communicate this to folks that couldn't make it, so that we can build and we can continue to do what we've got to do for these communities on the ground, because they're not the communities at the Capitol, right? No one lives at the mall. We have our own communities where we live, work, and play, where every day we are participatory in this system that's obviously broken. So it's at those levels that we have to help fix it.
Right on. Jamie, what are your thoughts on that?
On the political question?
Yeah.
I understand. I mean, I guess we're just coming at it with totally different definitions of what counts as political. I mean, it's not electoral politics, so I'll concede that, but it's political in every other way. Yeah, I mean, I agree with Joe. I think of political as it's a struggle for resources, and I mean, if this isn't a struggle for resources, I don't know what is. I mean, you have poor folks marching on the Capitol, chanting that we want treated with dignity. We want stuff. We want health care. We want medical care. We want the end of mass incarceration. We want you to stop paying money for military and start funding, our basic needs. I mean, that's politics. I mean, I feel like what I'm doing.
I mean, if we vote, does that happen? Do we get rid of that? Do we get that stuff unless we vote? Do things get better unless we vote?
Yeah, I mean, I think voting is a part of it too. But one of the things that folks in the campaign are saying a lot is this is about organizing the unorganized, and so we want to make active poor and working class people that aren't organized right now. We want to connect folks who are pissed off about not being able to get health care, for example. We want to connect them to an organization that's fighting for their right to health care. We want to get organizations who are doing work on mass incarceration in conversation with folks who are doing work on immigrant rights. Like we want to build power in that way. I mean, and building power is political. So I mean, yeah, and like part of this will be when you have that kind of power and when you have that kind of connections, we can vote together and we can vote for our interest, and we will. But not every day is election day. I mean, we still need to be making demands and articulating demands and building these relationships. So yeah, I mean, I think electoral politics matters. I'm not discounting it, but I think it's just one of many kinds of political things that we can do.
Maybe it's that the mechanics of what we do before we vote doesn't overtly seem political to folks, because sometimes it really is about getting on the same page as far as definitions. Sometimes it really is just about telling stories and getting a better understanding of where we sit. In Augusta, Georgia, we've built a group and organization that meets every week, and we don't, we talk about very, very political things, but part of the purpose of it is to build relationships, right? It's another place where we're intentionally building relationships to meet better outcomes for things that we don't have immediate answers for, but for which a critical mass of educated, informed, and active citizens can affect, right? So you got to build that first before it happens. It doesn't magically, there's not a wand. And I think that's kind of also what we're discovering here. And so not to completely discount Don's comment, Some things don't overtly seem political initially, but they definitely are organized in order to benefit a political end because they're political problems, right, that we're faced with right now, right? So the problem itself is very political. Our solutions to it will be, but because those political problems are entrenched in institutions and are very heavily funded, and have a very top-down structure of authoritarian sort of dictation, we have to come at that with a stronger, unified message of the many, and sometimes that's harder and takes more time, but it's worthwhile. And I will sort of validate the reality that a lot of times poor people are taken advantage of by sometimes well-meaning political, ends or people that feel or that may present as if they're fighting for us in politics, when in fact they're just using the same mechanics of low information and identity politics to just help themselves essentially. And it's important that we can understand what our problems are, what our experiences are, and how to fix them together first, so that we don't end up creating our own demagogues, essentially, that can be, the things that turn people off so much from politics or the political. But anyway, yeah, sorry, I know I'm going over here.
Well, I wanted to get into immigration as well, but we're going to have to do another show. Sorry, guys. You're going to have to come back. What are some final thoughts, some final takeaways that maybe even inspire you to, keep going and organize something comparable on your own? What are you taking away from this? Joe, if you want to start, you can.
Sure. Well, I gotta give props to you, Joy. You and the Poor People's Campaign have inspired me to continue telling the story and curating media for my community, because you've shown that you can reach folks, you can spur a conversation and challenge ideas and keep a conversation going with folks who are committed to this cause, not on the fence, not ooh maybe, not I'm gonna just watch from the sidelines. Folks that are really fighters in this movement. You've inspired me. The folks at the Poor People's Campaign inspired me. My mom inspired me, obviously. It brought me there this last weekend. So my big takeaway is we're starting a media company down here. It's going to be called Southern Sprawl Media, and we're going to be talking about issues of urban and rural, the sprawl essentially of everything in our economies and our justice system. And even in media, right? Because I think we're also fighting the 24-hour network, for-profit media every day, so that's my takeaway. What I can do, what I can contribute, the talents I have, lend me to take that action and grow on what we've been building here into something that folks can also consume and rely on. And so I'm eager, and you can count me as a colleague, Joy. We are.
Yay, that's awesome. I'm excited to hear that. Jamie, what about yourself? Also, if you want to tell a little bit about what you do as well.
Yeah. So, well, first, I realize we haven't said this yet. If folks are interested in the campaign, poorpeoplescampaign.org, there's a sign up link there, and you can get updates on the campaigns. And more importantly, can get connected to folks who are involved with it locally. So there's that. So what do I do? I teach. I'm a sociologist by training, and I teach at a John Jay College in New York City. I study immigration law and politics, sort of how they exist at the intersection of race and social class. And I'm political in Pennsylvania. I live in New York now, but I grew up in Pennsylvania. I wrote a book about my hometown of Hazleton, passed one of the first local anti-immigrant laws back in 2006. And so I wrote a book kind of unpacking that. Former mayor of the town is now running for Congress. Is in Congress, is now running for Senate. in Pennsylvania, Lou Barletta. And so I've been involved in Pennsylvania in a lot of ways still, including with some of these organizations I mentioned before that are kind of surrounded with this campaign. One of the takeaways that I'll just add, I think, so I mentioned organizing the unorganized. Another key point of the Poor People's Campaign is changing the narrative. Talking about moral issues in a way that gets us thinking about this differently. And I think that there's a lot of potential there too. And this is going to be one of those, political activities that you don't see the tangible results. It's not a win or a loss, but it's a changing narrative. And I kind of, felt that in a literal way after being there and hearing all of these speeches and kind of, because I think we can get on the defensive sometimes when, you have things happening like what's going on at the border and oftentimes you have to defend yourself against people who are saying, well, it's a crime to come across the country. And so like when the narrative is set from that point and then you find yourself defending like, well, no, it's not a crime. It's actually, and that backpedaling sort of, you're already sucked in. It's already too late because that's the narrative terrain that conversation's going to happen on. And I think really Reverend Barber is particularly gifted at this, just sort of reframing things. He had a line at the event. He said, when people can get unleaded gasoline but not unleaded water, just blow me away. He has this little way of playing with words and twisting things around and turning them upside down. And I think, that kind of discussion too is really important. When you think about things, like what I'm trying to say is when you get stuck thinking about things in terms of how the law is arranged, you get stuck in that field. And that's, the law in our country is passed by elites. Like that's their law. They have it set up in a certain way for a reason. It's even possible to refer to human beings as illegal because they've been illegalized by law, right? And so when you're fighting in that terrain, you're not set up to win. But when you're fighting in your own terrain, in our own terrain, when we're talking about things from a moral perspective, it looks a whole lot different. And so I think that's another one of the things from the campaign that's really important to think about is just sort of just rethinking it all, rethinking the way we approach all of this stuff, which we have to do if we're going to rethink the way we organize our society in the first place. Right? So that's a big takeaway for me. That's the thing I'm latching onto of this campaign at the moment.
Right on. Jamie, you have your New York primary tomorrow. Dun, dun, dun. Who are you voting for?
It's funny. I'm such a Pennsylvania politics guy, and I'm in like the key race in New York, and I realized like, oh gosh, I haven't paid nearly enough attention. So I'm voting for what is his name? The guy that his last name starts with a B. I'm drawing a blank because it's late. Help me out. Do you all know?
Beals?
Beals. I think I'm voting for Beals.
Oh, yeah. Beals.
I think so. I don't know. That again, that's the amount of work I put into it so far. I'm going to read more tomorrow about their platforms and stuff before I head in. So, what's your feeling from out here? Have y'all you two probably have paid closer attention than I have, even though.
Well, no, just by chance, actually, there was a really good piece done about that race where this journalist followed the Beals campaign, and Joy will kind of, it was kind of like the way you followed my campaign, Joy. It was, very much. This person, reporting on so many of the same things that we hit. We hit, the donors basically asking for, wanting to know that we could raise X amount before even investing. The Medicare for All question, Beals was the only one that's just out there loud and proud, saying absolutely no qualification. That was the same in our race. Of course, our race was in the Deep South. So, I think Beals is it's going to be an interesting. It's all about turnout, right? It's all about the numbers that you get at the end of the night. And from what I could gather from that piece, now I'm invested in your race. So I'm hoping for good things to happen from there too. But we've just got.
Raro. Joe, I'm sorry, I can't hear if you're still talking. But I I had uh, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on. I would love her to win. She's a huge Bernie-crat, and I am hoping so hard that people actually get off their freaking asses and vote. And I don't have to come back on Wednesday night and scold people like a pissed off mother, because that's what I had to do in California when only 21% of people actually voted. So no more bitching and complaining. If you can't get off your ass literally one time in every 2 years to try and change our country, and to use that to speak for people who need us to vote for progressives. This is life or death. I'm not being over dramatic. Like, people's lives are on the line for waiting for candidates who have, Medicare for all on their platform and things like that. We cannot waste any more time. If you're in, let's see, so tomorrow is New York, Colorado, Maryland, Oklahoma, and Utah. So New York, if you're in Bronx, Alexandria, if you're in Maryland, Vangelis, all the way. So hopefully just research who's progressive. The number one thing you want to do, see who takes corporate money. Number one. If they do, they're out. They're not progressive. That's the easiest way. Just start from there. But anyway, also Saturday, I will be live in Harrisburg, PA. We're going to be doing a march/protest for the children who are being taken by ICE. We have in Pennsylvania, we have a correctional facility in Berks County that is essentially what people are talking about, only with a prettier name. So we're going to be discussing that as well. I'll be interviewing people who have spoken for me when I've organized marches. So that'll be at Saturday at noon. Joe, you're back. Yay. So thank you guys so much for joining me. I knew this was going to be a rad conversation. You guys are awesome. I'm so glad I got to meet you, Jamie. You're a beautiful soul. Joe, I love you, and give Trent a big hug for me. So thank you guys so much, and I'll be in touch because I really would love to continue the conversation about immigration then as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, anytime. This was fun. I'd do it again whenever.
You guys heard that. All right. Thank you guys so much. You have a great night.
All right. Thank you. So long.
Sure. Bye-bye.